Well, in the land of the blind, there were sudden reports of new creatures discovered in the jungle. All the creatures appeared to be different. One blind man had felt something like a giant tree with huge solid legs. Another described a new animal like a snake with a long flexible tube. Yet another blind person reported a kind of wall-like creature with vast surfaces. And still another blind person had experienced something like a vast plant with huge leaves flapping. Well, the blind people all reported their discoveries to their king, a wise man with one eye, in the hope that he might know what these creatures were. "Aha," said the one-eyed king. "There aren't lots of new creatures, just one. What you felt wasn't a tree, but a leg. It wasn't a snake, but a trunk. Not a wall, but sides. Not leaves, ears. It would appear that you've all encountered the same thing in different ways. An elephant." There are, of course, different ways of describing the same thing. Just as our blind friends experienced an elephant in different ways, so too the kingdom of heaven can be described in separate ways. Here in Matthew chapter 13, Jesus describes the kingdom of heaven in various different ways, each of which with something to say to us. The parables of the mustard seed and the yeast remind us of small things, small beginnings which can have a profound effect. The power of God's work in us and through us. The tiny mustard seed, so small it's almost invisible, and yet which grows into a great big plant, a tree in which the birds live. The yeast, that fine, insignificant grain which flavours the entire bread. It's amazing to think how this whole COVID-19 began. We're not quite sure, and in one way it doesn't matter, but it started in just one infection, in one particular, largely unheard of place, maybe in a bat. And yet, look now, there isn't a single person in the whole world who isn't affected by it. From the least likely of origins can emerge the most unbelievable of consequences. And so it is with God. When we turn our hearts to God, we can never begin to imagine how he can use us, to understand what the consequences might be for ourselves, for others, and for the world in this life and the next. When I gave my life to Jesus at the age of 19, I could never have imagined how that decision would shape the rest of my existence, or rather how God would shape me and my life. Through one event, one encounter. Don't let's ever underestimate the power of God. The kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed or yeast. Awesome things are possible through even the tiniest of openings. And then Jesus compares the kingdom of heaven to treasure in a field. And when a man discovers it, he sells everything he has to buy that field. And likewise to a precious pearl. And when a man finds it, he sells all that he possesses and buys it. Remind us this time of value and commitment. How important is our faith? How valuable to us really is the kingdom of heaven? I wonder what is the most valuable thing you possess. In financial terms, maybe your house, a car perhaps. These days, a phone is often the thing people can least do without, or at least some kind of device. Is a pet or a close relationship, or maybe something completely different, an association with a football team perhaps, or an abstract entity like power or influence or wealth. None of these are actually most precious of all, though, are they? The most valuable thing we have is our soul, our faith, our commitment to God. And the challenge we face continually is, does the way that we live our lives reflect the value that we place on our faith? Do we pray to God as often as we talk to our pets or our loved ones? Do we read our Bibles as much as we look at our bank balance? And Jesus then compares the kingdom of heaven to a net, echoing last week's parable of the weeds, and reminding us that the kingdom isn't exclusive but open to everyone. Although that's not what many people seem to believe, even within the church, sadly. And pointing to the judgment to come, in which the good will be separated from the bad. We might reflect upon the separation of the wicked and the righteous, and I have no doubt that the kingdom of heaven is and will be a place of surprises, where the last are first and the greatest the least. Surely a call once again to evaluate continually our own hearts and lives in the light of the gospel, to avoid complacency and follow Jesus faithfully. And so, like the elephant in the land of the blind, there are of course many ways to describe the kingdom of heaven. I think the picture Jesus gives us here offers us a great deal for us to think about. The seeds which enable the greatest things from even the least likely of beginnings. The treasure which demands the highest of prices and the deepest of commitment. The net into which all can be caught, and after which the good will be separated from the bad. So why not take time this week to read and reread these words in Matthew 13 and reflect on what they might mean for you, for your life, and for our world.